Hey, you guys, this is Richard Sachs. I'm the host on Lost Arts Radio. It's nice to be with you again. We have a really great show today with our friend Ken Rohla, who was willing to show up on fairly short notice, which is nice because I've been getting a number of emails during the week, and actually for more than a week, about people concerned about what they're observing in the rollout of the 5G, and it especially people who know that they're sensitive to it, meaning that they can actually consciously feel the symptoms. And I think everybody's sensitive to it. It's just not everybody's conscious of that. So it's a legitimate concern, and it brings up the bigger question of technology and whether technology really does need to be opposed to our health and well-being. And I don't think so. I mean, over a long period of research, what I've come across is that it's not accidental, it's intentional. And we've had Barry Trower and other guests on the show, many times explaining that these technologies, especially the ones that are microwave and millimeter wave now technologies, were perfected as weapons prior to World War II. And we've had people on who debriefed the Soviet spies who used them and things like that. It's pretty interesting. But it's not just the microwave, it's also what they make clothes out of that you absorb through your skin, and what they put in the food intentionally, and what's put on the crops, not just pesticides and GMOs, but chemical fertilizers, which is actually the root cause of most of what makes the pesticides appear to be necessary. This is all technology that is not in line with harmonizing with nature for health. And so the question is not just looking at the wrong way of doing it, but what could be done instead. And I really like to talk to Ken because he's an engineer that is aware of the requirement of putting technologies in line with human and biosphere health and how to do that. So we're going to start out in relation to 5G, but then branch out and just see where it goes because it's a big issue. Welcome, Ken, and thanks for being with us. I appreciate it.
No, thanks, Richard. My pleasure. It's always good to visit with you.
Yeah. So let's start with the area of 5G and just go over for people for a second in a simple way what it is, why it's of any concern, and how it relates to the previous versions of the microwave technology coming out of the cell towers and the NexRad systems and the other transmitters that people might not be so aware of, why this is something different, why it might not be good for life forms, and then options of what could be done about it.
Okay. Well, for those that aren't aware, 5G stands for fifth generation wireless technology that cell phone companies are going to be rolling out and are rolling out in coming months. And aside from the usual issues of the concerns about electromagnetic fields and waves from cell towers, right now with fourth generation and previous iterations of cellular service, you've got these large towers spread out usually every few miles, and they have a stronger signal, but they're farther apart. And so studies have shown that, for people and organisms living within a quarter mile or so of these kinds of cell towers, there's definitely higher rates of cancer and disease. So there's been the concern about that. With fifth generation wireless, it's not just about improved data transmission and bandwidth for cellular service. It's also about implementing what's known as the Internet of Things, which is having smart appliances throughout your house. They're all Wi-Fi connected and connect to the Internet and report all kinds of data out to whomever. For example, right now on the market, there's a Wi-Fi enabled cordless toothbrush that you can get that will make a 3D map. I know, it's insane. It's beyond Orwellian.
Got to get that. It sounds so convenient.
Exactly. Why would you want a Wi-Fi enabled toothbrush? Well, so that it can make a 3D map of your mouth and send it to your dentist over the Internet. Great. Sounds great, right? And it can be. There's a lot of conveniences that can come out of this Internet of Things. And of course, that's what's being promoted. And so for the people that want that and buy into that and don't recognize the health threats, it's going to be a major public health issue, I believe, in the long term. But that's how the Internet of Things is being promoted, and that's part and parcel of 5G wireless, is that it's not just about improved cell phone use and faster download speeds and browsing and stuff on your phone. It's about implementing the Internet of Things, which really is an incredible surveillance system, because, you can have your toaster, your refrigerator. They've already got smart refrigerators on the market where they have computers built into the door, and the intention is to make the refrigerator become a hub where people congregate and get their emails and send emails and check on all of their things to do and that kind of stuff. Basically, have a home, a family-based computer that everybody can check in, log into. And also that computer can have cameras mounted inside the fridge so that you can, for example, be at the grocery store and see what you have in your fridge, or have the fridge contact you and tell you what you need to buy, that kind of stuff. So,
or the camera could point outside and see if you look hungry or something like that. Oh,
absolutely. And it will. Yeah. Along with, all these other spying devices like these Google and Apple devices that, these speakers and things you put in your house for voice activation of various things like turning lights on and off or whatever. Yeah,
Alexa and stuff like that.
Right, exactly. Siri, voice recognition. And so basically every moment of your life will be mapped and tracked. I mean, it already is extremely mapped and tracked, far beyond what most people understand. Even people that are aware that Google is spying on their searches and stuff like that have no idea how they're correlating that data, the extent that they're correlating that data with other data collectors. For example, credit card companies. Google buys information from credit card companies so they can correlate all of their data of what you're doing online and on your computer with the purchases that you make. And so all of this so-called smart technology will just radically increase that ability to track every move of individuals and be inside the home, see inside the home.
Just so it can give you better products, though, right?
Right. And again, there will be a lot of convenience with it. It will be very convenient, kind of like cell phones. Cell phones are a double-edged sword. They're very convenient when you're traveling. I mean, I don't know how we got along without GPS back in the day, because I recently got stranded in New Jersey at the Newark airport. I put on my cell phone, and I use a cell phone as safely as I can. I keep it away from me. I was using GPS, and it wouldn't work, and it sent me all around in circles. I was like, wow, man. And I didn't have a map. It was like, what did we
there's
do?
Myths that are, in the ancient times, our ancestors used to read maps.
Yeah, exactly. I still have a big pile of maps in my cars because, I've had instances when I've been traveling and lost cell signal or whatever. And, even though you can download maps to your phone, but the point being is that they are convenient, and, some of those conveniences we truly want to use. But if you understand the issues of privacy and health risks, then you can minimize those risks and use them in ways that are not so invasive. But so with 5G, because the bandwidth on the data, the amount of data that has to be transmitted back and forth is so high, they can't use conventional cellular transmission frequencies. So they have to use what's being called millimeter wave technology, which is basically just extremely high frequency signals. And because they're high frequency, they have much less power. And so it's kind of like when you go to the beach, if you're standing in the waves, when there's little waves lapping up against you, they don't have much power and they're no big deal. But they're
more frequent, though, right?
Exactly. They're much more frequent. You get a big kahuna wave coming in that can knock you down. It's slower. It's a lot bigger, but it has a lot more power behind it. And so because they're having to use these high frequencies to carry more data and it has less power behind it, they have to use towers much closer spaced. And in fact, about every 500, 600 yards, they have to have these towers. So they won't be as strong as a large 4G type cellular tower, but they'll be everywhere. They'll be ubiquitous, and they're being put in place and being hidden. Even conventional 4G towers are being hidden as various things like, and you know this because we've had experience with this, but they're being disguised as light poles and mailboxes and, of course, trees. And even in Arizona, cacti, they've got fake cactuses.
I found one 300 yards from where I live.
Right. And And you and I have had experiences that have validated to us that there's not just regular cell service going on these towers, or at least a lot of them. They've got military stuff going on, because we've seen evidence that scalar technology is being used on these towers, and so that is not anything that cell companies are going to be using. That's military. So there's more going on with these towers than we're being told, number one. But number two, just the ubiquitous nature of them, having these things every few hundred yards, just everywhere, is going to create a huge, even bigger field of EMF all over the planet. And so, we have to, number one, fight it. And I say fight it, do what you can do to stop this, number one. Talk to your local, especially your local town council people and local politicians, because you'll probably get more traction with them than at higher levels, state or national. But, because these folks, if you present them with the scientific evidence, and it's overwhelming that EMF field, electromagnetic fields are damaging to living organisms. There's abundant scientific peer-reviewed papers. For example, the Bioinitiative report is an amalgamation of over 1,800 scientific papers showing the huge variety of damage that EM fields can do from these various technological sources. You've got Magda Havas, Dr. Magda Havas, for people that want to look her up. That's Magda Havas, Magda Havas, PhD. She's a university professor who teaches about electromagnetic pollution and the effects on living organisms, and she's compiled a lot of studies and evidence on their effects on her website at magdahavas.com. And there are many other people, George Carlo and others, who have been exposing this for a long time. But with 5G, everybody is concerned, because what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about all of these towers all around us? Well, the one sort of good bit of news is that because they're using such small wavelengths, the frequencies and the power won't be so strong. But of course, they will be closer to you and all around.
What about the fact that people say they're now directional with 5G and they weren't before? So a beam could actually go right through your body, and that wasn't happening with the 4G.
Exactly. The way this technology works, these little mini towers transmit using a technology called beamforming. And beamforming is where they send a beam and bounce it off of objects to get it to its ultimate destination. And it's not just one beam, because it's kind of like radar, where it's sending out all these other beams to see where the destination location is. If you've got a cell phone or a Wi-Fi device talking to this tower, it's saying, here I am, and then the tower is going to go shooting out beams and locate it, and then calculate how it can get that signal to the source as most directly as possible. If you're behind buildings or whatever, or things that are blocking it, may bounce it in ways to get it to you. So that does make it more of a health issue, because you do have these directional beams shooting around. But that's already happening with EMF from a huge variety of sources already. People don't realize, but anywhere on this planet, you can turn on a radio or a television and pick up stuff from the airwaves. You've got airport radar guns, you've got military communication systems, you've got airlines, you've got, tons of different sources of EM radiation, and it's bouncing around us all the time in all different directions, and reflecting off of surfaces in our homes, and then passing through our bodies and interfering with cellular communication and other functions in the body. And so, these days you've got to first do an EMF audit of your property and see what's going on, because you may not be necessarily near any particular source. You may not be using wireless technology in your house, and yet you may have some area in your home that has a high level of electromagnetic radiation from some outside source that's reflecting it to you. Mm-hmm. I recently did an audit of my new manufacturing facility we expanded into, and it's in an industrial park, and we don't have any wireless technology in our section, but we're sharing a building with some other people, and they've got Wi-Fi and stuff like that. And those signals show up, so I'm going around with 4 different types of meters detecting different kinds of wavelengths. And what I found interesting was there were like certain little spots just in these random places that had really high EMF.
Oh.
And I can only surmise that it was being reflected from something, somewhere around us.
What about smart meters on the outside of the building?
Yeah, in that building, fortunately, we're not close to it, but there are banks of smart meters in that complex. Okay. And I've used, I manufacture powered scalar wave devices, so I put one of our large devices called the Home Shield out by these meters, and we've got them all around. We have rest shields, which are little pyramids, our powered pyramid scalar generators, throughout our building. So we've got that protecting us, and of course we avoid wireless use as well. So it's reasonably low within our building, just except for a few weird places that people aren't normally at anyway.
Can I ask you a quick question about the Home Shield? Because you mentioned that, and I also had been able to experiment with one, which is really interesting. And first of all, a question about how it works. If you put it out near those meters, which I assume you did, right? I think you said that.
Yeah.
And the meters are intended to send signals through people and everything, but getting to other meters relayed eventually back to the power company.
Right.
So your Home Shield is not blocking that, or they would come out right away and complain.
Right.
So how is it helping?
Okay. What these things do, what my devices do, is they create a strong scalar field with that uses frequencies that are created by natural. It creates natural harmonics from minerals that we embed in this substrate. Basically, it's a circuit that generates scalar waves of specific frequencies. And it's very complex. It's not like a conventional frequency generator. It has a really, really weird three-dimensional waveform that is composed of a whole lot of different waveforms that combine to create this weird waveform that kind of randomizes. So you're not getting just this normal pulse all the time. You do get a Schumann resonance pulse, which is a frequency in the Earth's atmosphere that will relax and de-stress living organisms. So you get that, but it's also kind of randomized, and you get a lot of different harmonics through these different materials that the signal is sent through. So it puts out a scalar field, in the case of the Home Shield, about 100-foot radius for EMF. And when these normally these waves and fields are sending signals bouncing all over the place in different directions. But when they hit this scalar field, all of the waves become parallel to each other. This is known as quantum coherence. And when those waves are parallel, then when they're passing through you, they're much, much quieter. And so they don't do the tissue heating, and they don't interfere with cellular communication nearly as much. Now, that doesn't mean that they're a panacea and that you can have a bank of smart meters right next to your bedroom and, tra-la-la, and not worry about it. No, absolutely not. But you mitigate as much as possible your exposure to them, stay away from them. If you've got smart meters on your house, opt out. I know Pennsylvania recently passed a law that actually mandates you cannot opt out. I don't suspect that that's going to last, because I'm sure lawsuits will start flying, because there's plenty of evidence showing that the problem with EMF fields, and the manufacturers of the smart meters and the power companies cannot show any scientific evidence that they don't cause damage. So I think ultimately those kinds of efforts will fail. So most people in the United States and the world can opt out of smart meters if they're willing to stand up for their rights, and they may have to be adamant about it. Most power companies give you the option of opting out. You just have to pay a little bit more money per month to for them to send a meter reader. I also, years ago, when I first started hearing about smart meters, I welded a steel cage over my meter. I've got a mechanical meter, and I built a 1-inch thick bar steel cage around it, welded it together, and bolted it through the entire wall of my house with carriage bolts so nobody can take it off or unscrew it. And here's the thing. The power companies here in Florida, they actually tell you this on your bill in the summertime, because, with hurricanes coming through and stuff like that, they don't want to be responsible for any damage to the meter except the meter itself and the wires going to it. So they will tell you that, all we own is the meter that plugs into the socket on the side of your house, and the wires going to it. The conduit and the socket that the meter plugs into, you own that. That's yours because you paid for that when you had the house built, whoever built the house. So legally speaking, they cannot mess with anything except the actual meter itself. They cannot, so if you put a cage over your meter, they cannot screw with it or it's vandalism. However, most people don't know how to stand up for their rights. I've seen people who denied, told the power company they didn't want a smart meter, and they sent a technician out with a police officer and tried to force them to change their meter. Well, that's completely illegal. But
they just have done it anyway. Yeah, they've arrested people who have gotten in the way of that.
Right. But if it's like if you call a police officer to have something like, dealt with like that, they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, that's a civil issue. That's not a criminal issue. Having a smart meter or not having a smart meter is not a criminal issue in, anywhere except Pennsylvania. And so therefore the police cannot be called. If they show up, they're breaking a law and they can be sued. And normally if you just say to them, what law are you, basing this on? They can't tell you because there is no law. Right. So if you know how to stand up for your rights and say, what are you doing here, officer? This is a civil matter. This is not a criminal issue. What law am I breaking? They can't. Then they'll leave. But if you don't know to do that, if you don't know how to stand up for your rights, then you're going to get screwed. What
if the power company says they have to have access to the meter? That's part of the agreement. Otherwise, they'll just have to turn your power off.
Right, and that does happen. But that's where I've got a friend right now in North Carolina who's dealing with that, and it's because she didn't know what to say to the power company. She said, I want to opt out. They said, fine, you can opt out, but we're going to put a smart meter on your house, but we won't turn the wireless part on.
Right.
And of course, she doesn't want that. She doesn't want. And so they have digital meters and they have mechanical meters that they can put on. Obviously, normally when smart meters go in the house, your power bill jumps up significantly.
Right.
And they, and
that's
of course
to give you the special discount when you can't use it.
Right. And, so their claims that these mechanical meters or whatever are not accurate. The truth is the smart meters aren't accurate. They're also a fire hazard. They have a significant number of them that burn houses down. And so you have to know what grounds to argue with the power companies on.
Yeah.
My approach would be to, first of all, say, I have health concerns, or just, actually, I wouldn't even say that. I'd say, look, I'm very sensitive to electromagnetic fields, and I cannot be exposed to this. I get heart palpitations. And this is true, actually. I discovered in traveling, when I was exposed to massive amounts of EMF traveling, I started getting heart arrhythmia. And at first, it didn't occur to me what it was until I realized. And then I got away from it, and guess what? It stopped.
The brand new cars have that ability, too.
Yeah, exactly. So first thing I would say is that I have health issues that this exacerbates. I can't be exposed to this, number one. Number two, what scientific proof do you have that these things are not damaging to human health? There is none, so they won't have that.
Right.
And number three, I'm concerned about the privacy of these things because, it's been proven a couple of University of North Carolina professors hacked smart meters and proved that not only can they be hacked pretty easily, but also the data can be interpreted in unbelievable detail. They actually were able to tell what somebody was watching on television simply by looking at the power signature. Right. Not that they were watching television, but what shows they were watching on television.
Yeah, or what movies you're watching, stuff like that.
Right. So there's plenty of documentation on this kind of stuff. Josh Del Sol at takebackyourpower.net has a lot of good information compiled on that. But it's really being prepared and understanding what to say to these companies so that it's not worth their while to try and push it. If they think that you're a pushover, then they'll push over on you. But if you send them written letters or emails, put things in writing, and and also show, for example, like the Bioinitiative report citing specific studies that have been done on millimeter wave technology and the damaging effects. Maybe not smart meters specifically, maybe not 5G specifically, but on millimeter wave technology, there are studies showing the damaging effects. Then you can say, here are the scientific studies. You show me yours that say it's not damaging. You start doing that kind of stuff, and they're gonna leave you alone and put a mechanical meter or a digital meter on your house without the smart technology.
Yeah, there's a lady who talked to me from Arizona near where I am, and she wanted the old analog meter, but they said, well, no, we have to take it off. We're not buying those anymore. We can't service them anymore. For everybody's benefit, we're going to give you the other kind. And she said, I don't want a smart meter. And they said, no problem. We'll give you this digital non-smart meter. But the thing that she's experiencing is because it doesn't transmit, they have to come in her yard now to plug into it to read it. And she's got dogs in her yard. And they won't give her a small window when they're going to come out. So they say, well, just make sure your dogs aren't in the yard for several days at a time, and it'll be great. And, she can't do that because she's gone during the day.
Well, that's always been the case with the mechanical meters, and I understand too. You have to look at it from the power company standpoint that, number one, it is a big cost savings. I mean, there are obviously other heinous agendas, but it is a big cost savings for them to have these meters. Number one, I have met I have a friend who's a power company lineman, and he's told me stories about, getting shot at and having dogs attack him and all kinds of stuff going on people's properties. So I can understand them wanting to reduce their risk of their employees. And it's expensive hiring people to do that. So I understand that. But still, eventually we're going to have wireless technologies that do not harm people. That's completely possible. You could have, if you chose the right frequencies, whether it's electromagnetic or scalar, you could have devices that could outperform what we have now without all this stupid technology of having antennas all over the place. That's ridiculous. That is not necessary. There's a company right now that has a cellular technology that's being used in Japan that works from satellites. And you don't have all these towers everywhere, that it's the reason.
There's two sides to the satellite issue too, because I know Elon Musk's company is planning to launch, hundreds and hundreds, if not more, satellites starting right soon now, and they're going to be beaming 5G down to everywhere on the earth where they can't put a tower.
Right, and I'm not saying that satellite-based systems, as they are implemented now, are a solution. No, not at all. And also, by the way, most people don't know this, but you can't just throw a satellite up anywhere in space around the Earth. They don't just orbit willy-nilly. There's actually a line around the Earth, like an equator, where all the satellites must line up and be in this band for various reasons. And they're actually an international organization that tracks where everybody's satellites are in this band so that nobody's stuff interferes with other people's stuff. And so you can't, and it's getting filled up. That's the thing, so there's
and it's around the equator, you said?
Well, it's not necessarily around the Earth's equator, but it is, and it's a ring around the Earth where all these satellites are lined up basically in a line. They're not just zipping around randomly around.
No, I thought they had stationary orbits. So they stay over one part,
Exactly, but it's in a band. It's not, they're not scattered in different places. They're in a band because in order to stay in geosynchronous orbit, they have to have a very exact height and locations in relation to the Earth's magnetic field. And that kind of stuff.
It also occurs to me that how could you possibly have a what do you call a geosynchronous orbit over a part of the Earth that's not spinning like the poles?
Right.
Because then the satellite would have to be stationary, literally.
Right. And, there may be military stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of really advanced technology that may be hiding out in other parts of the atmosphere. But for the public satellite systems, there's only so much space up there to put satellites in. It's not like we've got unlimited space to throw them up there. So
how is SpaceX going to put up hundreds of new satellites then?
Well, that's a good question. They may be taking out older satellites and putting in places. But I had a friend who used to work in the agency, and I don't remember the name of it, that tracked all of the positions for the satellites, and he was saying that it's filling up, and that so I don't know if they're pulling out old satellites and things are being obsoleted out or what, but there is a finite amount of space that you can put these satellites up. Mm-hmm. But whether it's satellite-based or antenna-based, the thing is we could and should be using frequencies that are not damaging to human beings and living organisms. You could have scalar technologies, for example, that where you could have frequencies that are healing. You could have a cell phone that actually heals you of disease while it has incredible capabilities of non-local communication ability. So, for example, you could have a cell phone that could talk to another phone on Mars with perfect clarity, because scalar waves are non-local. They're not propelling themselves through physical 3D space only. They're also propagating through multiple frequencies or dimensions of time and space. And so you basically can have instantaneous communication anywhere in the cosmos.
Yeah, that would be really amazing. And in fact, that's probably why people are, shall we say, encouraged not to demonstrate anything like that, because if it was ever publicly shown to a wide audience, it would be really hard to keep the other ones going.
Well, very true. It's very true. I remember reading a couple years ago, there was a German company that was working on a scalar cell phone, and then they kind of disappeared. I've looked and looked, and I haven't been able to find them. So, yeah, I noticed this years ago when I was working with free energy technology in the 90s that what will happen is you'll see some really amazing advanced technology show up in the scientific journals, and you'll start hearing about the research, and it's really exciting. And then after a year or two, it just disappears.
Something happened, yeah.
Yeah, and it's because, governments will show up at your doorstep, and they will sequester it and classify it, and say it's of strategic importance, and then the patent goes black on it. You never see it
just like
again.
They did with Indiana Jones with the Ark, right?
Well, just like they did with
in the warehouse.
In real life with Pons and Fleischmann back in the 80s, there were two University of Utah professors who discovered cold fusion. And I guess they probably figured that if they went through the mainstream journals, it would get squashed. So they went straight to the press and announced it. And, of course, they were vilified and attacked heavily by the professional, physics and science societies and professional organizations, which is one of the ways that, technologies are suppressed. And they were ridiculed and literally driven out of the country and discussed. Their careers were ruined, and one of them, died. I think the other one is still alive. I don't remember which one, but they were completely just vilified and ridiculed, and there were claims made that their technology couldn't be reproduced, blah, blah. Well, now it's been discovered that everything that they said was true, and it has been validated many times by other scientists around the world, but they're not calling it cold fusion, they're calling it low energy nuclear resonance, because, the powers that be don't want people to equate that with what Pons and Fleischmann did, or with the idea of cold fusion.
And it's probably not being manufactured on a wide scale anywhere, right?
No. There are people trying. There are lots of people trying to get it out.
Well, what about the guy that demonstrated you can run your car on water indefinitely?
Well, there's been a bunch of those. I worked with one of those back in the 90s. I worked with a man named Ewell Brown who developed water-fueled technology. And this was really coming from a man named William A. Rhodes back in the 60s. I mean, water fuel's been around since at least the 1800s. John Keeley and others, were working on it. Not steam engines, but, a different phase of water. Basically, you can do things to water. You can turn water into a plasma or a gas that is like a fourth phase of water. The three phases we're familiar with being solid ice, liquid water, and steam, but it can exist as a plasma or as a gas. And this is what Ewell Brown was doing. He would use electrolysis in a very special way, using pulse electrolysis to bring what some people call 0-point energy into the system. Basically, we're surrounded by tons of energy in the space in between subatomic particles of matter. And so that energy can be tapped in various ways. So Brown figured out a way to pulse electricity through water in a very specific way inside of metal tubes made of special alloys with special dimensions. And it would develop resonance that would break the H2O molecules apart into hydrogen and oxygen and then recombine them back into a different geometric configuration, molecular configuration, that he called HHO. And so basically you get this gas that was clear and didn't have an odor, but you could burn it, and it would burn with a blue flame, just like propane or something. But when you burn stuff with it, it had really weird quantum properties, and it would react at the atomic level with the material. And so you could, for example, weld anything to anything with this gas. And I actually had one of these welders back in the 90s for a few weeks and played with it. And, because it would melt things or alter things at the atomic level, you could weld glass to wood or ceramic to metal or, plastic to metal or anything to anything. It was just amazing. And it had a really weird flame. If you ran your hand through the flame, it wouldn't burn you if you ran it through quickly, but it felt cold.
How does it know that your hand is not something to melt and weld?
Well, it would if you left it on it, but when you just run it through real quick, it doesn't react with organic tissue the way it does with inorganic, for one thing.
Okay.
And I don't understand all the physics. It's really weird stuff. I mean, they had teams of engineers and scientists and physicists, and they did a demonstration of this technology because it could neutralize radioactivity. You could actually take radioactive materials and burn them with other materials, and they would combine at the atomic level and create a non-radioactive material. And so they demonstrated this. I was there when they demonstrated this in front of about 50 engineers and physicists, and I think 3 or 4 Department of Energy officials and a couple of U.S. senators. And what was interesting was the U.S. senators got excited and went back to their constituents and wanted to develop it. They got squashed and shut up.
Right.
But the DOE officials, they would absolutely refused to believe what they saw right before their own eyes. And, this was with measuring equipment, documenting everything.
Well, they must have been highly educated, so they knew that was all impossible.
Exactly, exactly. And that's exactly my experience. I had a friend who was married to the CEO of the largest nuclear waste disposal company in the United States. And I went to him and I said, "You've got to look at this technology. This is absolutely amazing." This guy was fighting, when I was talking to him, he was in the middle of a battle with a big group of activists because they were trying to put a nuclear waste dump in Raleigh, North Carolina on a fault line, which is utterly ridiculous.
Good plan, right.
Yeah, just encase the stuff in barrels of concrete and bury it in the ground. Yeah, that's scientific.
Should be good for a million years that way.
Yeah, it's just nonsense. And so, I went to this guy and said, "Look, here's an option. You can actually neutralize this stuff." He would not even consider it.
How did you get in to even talk to him?
Well, he was the husband of a friend of mine. And so I had dinner with him. I went and had dinner with him.
Right.
And, and he just utterly refused to listen.
Did he tell you anything about why he wouldn't listen to you?
No, he just said, "It's impossible, blah, blah, blah." But I'm sure it's because, he's making millions of dollars in his position running this company, for one thing. Because, that would totally destroy his entire company if somebody came along and neutralized radioactivity.
And that would be a technology that could be distributed at the local level and everybody could use it, right?
Exactly. And it could clean up Fukushima and Chernobyl and places like that.
Right. It would ruin a huge industry.
Right. And Brown's technology is not the only one. This is something that I have talked about for many years, and I have the actual patents listed on my website. There are 61 patents worldwide for methods for either fully or partially neutralizing radioactivity, including 8 in Japan. So we have had for at least since the 60s the technology to neutralize radioactivity. It's also been studied a lot by governments, and they understand that radioactivity is not what we have been told it is in mainstream science. The Russians, for example, discovered that when they took nuclear materials that were irradiating nuclear radiation and dropped them down extremely deep oil wells, like 17,000 feet down in the ground, after a day or two they pull them back out, they were no longer radioactive. And it would take 3 or 4 days before they would start to become radioactive again. And what they discovered was that the atomic structure of those elements act like scalar wave antennas that pick up scalar waves coming from the sun and then convert it to radioactivity. And so they're basically like little pyramids in that they, the radioactive elements, their atomic geometric structure are fractal antennas that pick up this scalar energy coming from the sun and then convert it to radioactive emissions.
But usually things in nature don't convert things into harmful forms that would eliminate life. So what's going on there?
Well, it depends on, that's very, very true from the standpoint that anything that living organisms can normally come in contact with, we wouldn't be bumping into radioactive elements just laying on the ground. They're normally buried very deep underground.
So it's concentrating something in an unnatural form, basically.
Well, and my belief is that nature, there are reasons for everything in nature, and I don't know why nature would create radioactive elements, but I'm sure they have a purpose to the Earth.
Right.
But generally speaking, radioactive elements are not very abundant near the surface. They just haven't been a concern. But with us digging around and also creating them in laboratories and things like that, and of course using them for bombs, we've taken it to a whole new level.
What the crude uranium is the form that they're all concentrated out of, right? Or things like that.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's not just uranium, but there are certain radioactive elements that occur naturally in nature, and then a lot of the radioactive isotopes and materials are created from others. Yes.
Right. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so therefore, you can create these radioactive spin-offs of certain elements. Why does it not stand to reason that you could create non-radioactive spin-offs of them?
Yeah.
You can.
So my question is that if you dug up some uranium, does it come out in can you get just big boulders of uranium, or is it a whole bunch of little pieces that you have to put together and refine? Or how does that work? Do you know?
I don't know. I've never studied that in depth. So I don't. Probably both. You probably get ore that you can extract it from, and there may be some pure deposits of it that are radioactive, but I don't know. I'm not an expert in geology.
But they're not around at shallow depths in general. Right?
Generally not. Generally not.
Okay. So the problem that you illustrated with a lot of examples was that there are really good ways to use technology in a way that is friendly to life.
Right.
And those are being suppressed.
Right.
And an example of that comes to mind is with your home shield. I told you about it, that the one I was looking at and testing, this guy that looked like he was out of Ghostbusters, Bill Murray with the little thing that you check for radiation and stuff. And it was near the cell tower that I discovered that's a secret cell tower less than 300 feet from where I was living. And he was going around checking for some reason from AT&T, and he was looking for bad interference of things that would stop people from the life-saving benefits of cell towers, like being able to dial 911 really fast. And he said that this device that must be a mistake, which was your home shield, was interfering with some kind of crazy bad radiation from the benefits of the cell tower. And he made them take it down.
Yeah, that's what I found interesting when that occurred, is that's impossible. If they were using conventional electromagnetic technology, cellular technology for cell phone use or whatever,
it wouldn't pick it up, right?
It's impossible for it to interfere.
I checked it later with a regular meter, and it didn't show up.
Exactly.
But I looked at his meter, and it showed it really clear.
Exactly, and that tells me right there that what they've got on those towers is not just conventional electromagnetic technology. It's some kind of scalar technology, and it's most likely military.
But it would show those. It would show them. No, he knew nothing about what he said. Maybe it's a problem in your house's wiring. You need an electrician out here right away. But he showed two things on the meter. One was from the cell tower that looked like very conventional and very regular. That was the beneficial one that was enabling you to dial 911. And the other one from the home shield, and a smaller one from the rest shield, which we can talk about in a minute, was a completely different waveform. But my point was he had a meter that would pick up both. And it wasn't that both were coming necessarily from the cell tower, because the cell tower didn't show anything like that on the meter. It was only the home shield and the rest shield.
Exactly.
But the rest shield he thought was too small to be a big problem.
Yeah,
just exactly. Probably wasting electricity or something.
And that's one of the issues that we have sometimes with people that will get conventional EMF meters and they'll put them on our devices and go, well, this isn't doing anything because it's not showing up on the meter, right? Or it doesn't. They'll like have let's say a Wi-Fi router, and the scalar devices we make don't interfere with that. So they take a conventional EMF meter up to the Wi-Fi router and I go, well, this rest shield isn't, it's lowering the EMF
it's still at all. Just as strong, right?
And it's because exactly that you can't use a conventional EMF meter to measure scalar waves. And so if this guy was using some kind of meter that was detecting the home shield or the rest shields, he definitely
had a combination meter of some kind. It must have been sophisticated.
Right.
But he was just trained to think anything that would come up on that side is very bad. And he said they have the right to come in your house, relating to what you said about smart meters. He said this is, like a public safety issue. So if they think you have something interfering with a cell tower, that's potentially harming your neighbors. And therefore, they can come in your house anytime and take it away.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you let them, if you believe what they tell you. And, I've got friends who work in power companies here locally, and the thing that I see, they know about this stuff because, they're my friends. But what I see is that, power company employees, they're just regurgitating what they've been told. They don't really know. And so, when you're talking to somebody, a representative of the power company, and saying, I'm concerned about EMF, health exposure, whatever, they just regurgitate these scripts.
It's totally safe. Yeah.
Right.
It's government approved.
They don't know. Right. And so, they'll say, for example, like, oh, well, our meters only broadcast every 4 hours for 45 seconds. And then you can go out to the meter with an EMF meter and see that's not true. It's going off all the time, So you have to come at them with facts. You have to document and show. And, for example, film your, if you got a smart meter around, take an EMF meter out there and film you measuring it, and then post it on YouTube, and then, make a stink about it, and then, let the power company know that, but you've got to be willing to stand up for your rights, and you have to know how to do that. And so that's...
Yeah, because they can try to just intimidate you. And if you think, well, the law, it works with vampires, they can't come in your house unless you ask them to, right?
Right.
So it's similar with power companies because they're closely related in some cases.
Right.
And if they come in and you say no, they may go away and come back with the police and arrest you, or just force you to let them come in their house, your house.
Well, see, it's interesting. I've had experience with, civil property issues because I had a neighbor. We share a driveway, and he was blocking my driveway. And then, whole another issue. But this neighbor was very problematic. He was blocking my driveway. So I'm in the county, so I call the sheriff's department. They come out and they go, well, there's nothing we can do. This is a civil matter, right?
Exactly.
Right? But
besides, we don't really feel like it.
Exactly. I said, yeah, but if this was your driveway, you would do something about it.
Oh, yeah. Then it would be federal law and all that.
Exactly. It's just like they don't want to get involved. And so you can use that concept, though. It's like, if there's not a law specifically saying that you've got to have a power meter on your house, and if they can't cite it, then they got no business.
Then they're acting illegally, and if they do it anyway, then you have to figure out what to do.
Exactly. And then, also I've discovered too, when you talk to the power company officials and you start talking about class actions, and then they'll send you to their law representatives, their legal representatives, that's when you can get action as well. Because there are companies, there are law firms out there that they just love to look for big pocket companies. They're abusing.
Be the next Aaron Brockovich or something.
Right. Exactly. So, there are law firms in Washington, D.C. There's tons of them, and they're, of course, all over the country that are consumer protection organizations, but they seek out class action lawsuits. And so if it can be shown that that there's liability or potential liability there, they will take it on. And so power companies don't want to mess with that. So if you start talking like that, it's like, well, I'm going to have to contact an attorney and see if maybe there's grounds for a class action on this, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Then you're going to they don't want to tangle with you. Yeah.
No. The problem is there's a lot of people who have been responded to with that they just turn off their power. And some of them have been without power for years and waiting for, you mentioned two things. One is the L word, liability, and the other is Josh Del Sol. And they've been working on this program, which you may know about, notice of liability, right? But I don't know of anybody that's actually successfully used it yet.
Right.
And everybody's been waiting for it to be developed for the last 2 or 3 years.
Exactly.
Do you know anything about that?
I've known people that have used those kinds. As a matter of fact, I've used those kinds of arguments successfully. But you're kind of trading one form of slavery for another, because you wind up having to constantly, be looking over your shoulder and fighting whoever it is that you're dealing with. Number one,
and they can afford to harass you,
right?
And
but class actions are different. If you can get a class action going on, that can make an impact. And I think that may be why the power companies are normally allowing people to opt out. So for most people that don't want to get into a big battle, the thing to do is ask them, well, if you want to put a digital non-smart meter on my house, what's the make and model of the meter? And then go look it up and make sure that it truly is not a smart meter. It's just a digital meter. Yeah. Those won't have much EMF at all, and those are no big deal. And because you have to appreciate, mechanical meters are really old technology. They're 50-year-old, 60-year-old technology.
Right. They're just non-invasive, though, and they don't start fires, and, they don't charge you extra at the peak times for electric use and things like that.
But the non-smart, non-transmitting digital meters, those are a reasonable, in my mind, they're a reasonable alternative. And, you can also just put... with one of those, if you're concerned about, you can measure the EMF. Don't take my word for anything, but get a meter and measure the EMF coming off of them. And if a digital non-transmitting meter has more EMF locally, let's say it's right next to your bed or something like that, then you can shield it. It's not going to cause a problem to put like metal screen. As a matter of fact, if you go on YouTube, you can search on foiling a smart meter, and you can see how you can put like aluminum. It has to be metal screen over the outside of the meter, and on the inside wall where the meter is, you can put about 3-foot square sheet of a couple of layers of heavy-duty aluminum foil, and that'll block it. That'll block a smart meter, sufficiently.
Do the non-transmitting kind start fires or not?
I don't know. I haven't talked to my friends in the power company about that, but I would suspect it would be less because I have dissected smart meters, and what I see, what probably causes some of the problems is there's a relay or what's the technical term for it? A solenoid that will that they can shut the power off remotely. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why they really adamantly want smart meters, is so that they can shut off your power remotely if you can't pay the bill.
Right.
With a digital meter, they can't do that. They have to come out and unplug it. But that,
you mean with the analog meter?
With a smart meter. Well, with a digital, even a digital meter, but it's a non-transmitting meter.
I see.
They can't shut off remotely. But I suspect that the solenoid assembly and that connection for being able to shut the power off is where some of the fires may start.
That's where it might arc or something, right? Okay, interesting. So again, if the devices that you have, the Home Shield and the Home Shield particularly, if that doesn't interfere, which you just said it doesn't, right, with the emissions of the microwave device,
right?
Explain again how that's protecting people without blocking those transmissions.
Okay. So normally, if you could see, I think there are YouTube videos that kind of show visualization of how waves really propagate through space, but you have to understand that like I said, you're surrounded by a lot of different kinds of electromagnetic waves and from varying sources. And so they're all, coming at different angles. They're just around you all the time, wherever you're at, shooting at different angles, and they pass through the body and they interfere with cellular communication. And then if you've got something like a cell phone, which is a strong source of microwaves, and you put it right up to your head, it's going to heat up tissue. It's actually going to heat up the water in your head, because at that power rate, it's actually going to do that and have other damaging effects. That's
the thermal damage, right? And then there's non-thermal damage too.
Right, exactly. And you get the non-thermal damage way before you ever get thermal damage. As a matter of fact, you may never have any thermal damage.
That's why they say they're safe, is because they don't boil the water in your brain and stuff.
Exactly, which is ridiculous. And it's been proven scientifically not to be true. As I mentioned, if you go to the Bioinitiative Report website or go to Magda Havas's website, you can see umpteen scientific papers showing this, the damage that EMF does. And it's non-ionizing. That's another one of the things. It's like, it's got to be ionizing for it to be damaging. No, it does not. It interferes with brainwave states. Cell phones, for example, even if you're not sticking up right up next to your head, if you're in proximity where you're using them with even an air tube headset or something like that, they're cycling at billions of cycles per second, and the brain and the nervous system are designed to entrain with pulsing of any kind. And it's designed that way to actually slow us down and get us into deep sleep states and de-stress us from natural sources of pulsations that are in our environment. So
harmonizing with the Schumann resonance and stuff.
Right. Exactly. But when you're exposed to something cycling at billions or even thousands of cycles per second. The brain and nervous system
try to harmonize with it.
Right. They try to entrain with that, and it fries them, and then it accelerates brainwave states to where your brain won't slow down and shut down at night, and so you don't get into the deep brainwave states when you go to sleep, and therefore you don't get good sleep, and then you get a whole cascade of health problems from a lack of quality sleep, right, and insomnia, that kind of stuff. And I hear it all the time. People are always saying, "Oh man, I have horrible sleep problems." It's like, well, how many minutes do you use on your cell phone a month? And it's always, a high number.
Yeah.
So, I have a cell phone. I've got it loaded up with apps. I use it when I travel. I don't use it when I'm local. But there are certain conveniences on it that are really indispensable for travel. So I use it. But I use it, intelligently. I don't stick it up to my head ever. I either use it on a surface, or I use it on a surface with an air tube headset if I'm going to be on there well. And actually, I rarely do that because I'm never on my cell phone more than a minute or two. I tell everybody, friends, family, staff, don't bother trying to get a hold of me on my cell phone. I don't.
And text. You don't carry it around in your pocket either.
Exactly. If I do carry it in my pocket, I either turn it off or I put it in airplane mode. But even when it's in airplane mode, it is still transmitting radio waves because the GPS in a phone uses not just cell signals, but it also uses radio signals to get its location from satellites. And
so is there any reason to ever use airplane mode if you could just turn it off instead?
No, ideally turn it off. Sometimes if I'm, let's say, popping into a store or something really quick, and I may need it in that store to take a picture of something, then I will put it in airplane mode real quick, go in and take my picture, and then shut it off. Just because it's a lot quicker. It's faster than turning it on and off. Because when you're turning it on, it's going to cycle through and actually irradiate you more than a little blip of radio waves.
Okay, so what is airplane mode?
Airplane mode is just, on your phone. Every phone has a setting where you can set it into what's called airplane mode, where it shuts off the cellular signal. And it still is transmitting radio waves to satellites for its GPS location. And it's been shown, by the way, that Google, even when you turn off location services on your phone, Google still tracks your location 24/7. It never really shuts off. There's also an NSA scientist who showed me, and actually he did a public presentation on this at the Tesla Tech conference a few years ago, that cell phones have scalar wave technology built in them also, so that they can track and spy on you, even if the phone is off and even if the phone is inside of a Faraday cage. So
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So they are tracking devices, and even if you wrap them in foil or put them in a metal box, they still have the capability of spying on you. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are always spying on you with the scalar stuff. I don't know. But he showed the actual hardware of this scalar technology in cell phones. And I said to him, well, how do you keep these things from spying on you then? And he said, well, when you're at home or if you're at work or whatever, leave it out in your vehicle. Put it in a Faraday cage, leave it in your vehicle.
Right.
But for just the most obvious types of spying, normally it's like it's not that like the NSA may be spying on everybody every moment of the day. They're collecting all this data, and then it gets sent to a gigantic data center in Utah that the NSA has. And actually the former chief technology officer of the NSA has, he quit in disgust and is out on a lecture circuit talking about this. He said it's unbelievable that the amount of data that the NSA collects on data, they just throw it into this huge database, and they don't necessarily look at you unless you become a person of interest.
Right.
And then most people say, well, I got nothing to worry about because
like somebody who invents advanced technology or something.
Exactly. Yeah. The people that are trying to really make change for the better on this planet, those people become persons of interest. But you can become a person of interest even if you're completely innocent, simply by being in the same neighborhood as somebody who may be a person of interest.
Right.
So people think that it's like, oh, I got nothing to worry about, or why should I care? I'm not doing anything, that the powers that be would care about. It's like, you never know. You may, with artificial intelligence especially, analyzing all this data now, a lot of times people are incorrectly identified and categorized and, run into trouble because of artificial intelligence.
So the Internet of Things is going to increase the amount of data that can be collected by quite a bit, right?
Absolutely, exponentially, massively, if it's implemented. That's the question.
Right.
There are a lot of people that are opposed to it because they understand these issues, and so municipalities now are starting to sue the carriers and try to legally ban 5G from coming in. But the states and the federal government are trying to create laws that don't allow the municipalities to pass laws to do that. Now, what's interesting is this all goes back to what people, if people understand their rights and how to stand up for them, because even like local politicians, most don't understand that the power in this country does not come from the federal government and disperse down.
It's the other way around.
It's the other way around. The United States was originally set up so that the governments were empowered from the individual through, what periodic taxes were implemented. We didn't have a tax system when this country was founded. We didn't have a tax system for many, many years because the government was funded through services it provided, and it was minimal, and it didn't need a huge amount of funding.
Well, also through trade tariffs.
Exactly.
Which also protected the industries, because otherwise the steel industry would have never existed and things like that, because they could get it from slave labor overseas.
Exactly. But if governments, whether it's a local government or a state or national government, wanted money from the people through taxation, the local municipality had to go to the people and say, okay, we want to do this tax. And back in the day, hundreds of years ago, it was a temporary tax just for this one thing. They would get the money from the local government would give it to the state, and the state would give it to the federal government. And in that way, even the federal government was empowered through the individual and controlled by the individual. And then over time, the bankers and industrialists got that process reversed through enacting statutes and manipulating the system, so that now even politicians think that the federal government is the ultimate authority, and and the way they control it is by doling out money. They're directly taxing people and then doling the money back out to the states and the local municipalities. And so that's how they're controlling things. But it's totally illegal.
And they also constantly refer to the supremacy clause, saying that, the federal government just trumps everything else.
Right.
And that's completely false, because it's the wording is only pursuant to the Constitution. So all that means is in areas where they're empowered, they're empowered.
Right, and there's a modern-day economist, and I don't remember his name, but he was saying that the reason that the U.S. dollar is the accepted world currency is because it's backed by men with guns. And that's exactly more valuable than gold. Right, so that's really kind of the de facto power that this is coming from, is that that people are still willing to join the military and enslave themselves, not understanding how things really work. And they're taught that, they're being noble in defending the country against outside threats, which is true. There are, I'm not dismissing the military people because they are, in my mind, the people that are willing to lay down their life for their country are some of the greatest people that we have.
Right.
But at the same time, they need to understand that most of the time, militaries are used to back political agendas that are not in the interest of our own people.
Military power is kind of like an individual firearm. It's a tool. You can use it for good or bad. And it's not the tool. The tool's great.
Right. Exactly. So at any rate, we've got to take back our power. There are more and more people in the military and in these alphabet agencies that don't like what's been going on and are speaking up. And they are bucking the system. And as I mentioned, former chief technology officer of the NSA. I mean, that's the highest you get technologically in the NSA.
Is that William Binney that you're talking?
Yeah, yes, William Binney. So this is how we change things. But with 5G, you've got to be willing. First of all, willing to stand up for your rights. You've got to know how to stand up for your rights. You've got to know what to say. And if you use the right magic words, usually you can get what you want.
I had a question that I forgot to ask you when you were explaining the frequencies and what they did, and that they don't have to be designed to hurt you. That's not done by accident. That was exactly weaponized. They could be done in a friendly way. And one of the things that people who know are complaining about is that prior to 5G, I think they were saying that the frequency was such that it would affect the natural frequency of water.
Right.
And with 5G, it's going to undermine the frequency of oxygen.
Right, exactly.
And that's kind of an important step up.
Yeah, because oxygen, I mean, it's bad enough. Water is a homeopathic solution, meaning that materials, fields, chemicals, pressurization, heat.
It's programmable, right?
Right. The water molecules, water is a liquid crystal, and the molecules, they like to latch onto each other with healthy water in groups of 6. And they do this in billionths of a second, where, an individual molecule will latch onto 5 other molecules, and if it's healthy water, create some kind of 6-sided geometric form, and then it'll let go and latch onto other ones. And it's doing this billions of times per second. And that overall, that creates a pattern of geometry in that clustering that will convey information to the body. And in the case of healthy water, it will trigger a healing response in the body. If it's damaged water, it will create trigger a disease response in the body. And so that's the whole basis. Which
just happens to be what's going on with 4G and below, right?
Right. Well, and there's lots of frequencies. It's not necessarily that they picked a frequency per se to damage people homeopathically, but the fact that a particular frequency was chosen that exactly lines up with water and damages water, it's a little suspicious.
It's an amazing coincidence.
Right. And then 5G comes along, and water, of course, has an extremely important role in the body, and then oxygen.
It's also most of the body is water.
Right. Exactly. And oxygen is what powers the body, and it allows for the assimilation and the production of, or the utilization of ATP in the cells. It also is what kills parasites and pathogens in the body. And basically, when you've got a high oxygen level in the body, you have health. It keeps parasites and pathogens down. It keeps cellular metabolism working well and that kind of stuff. So It is very suspect that the exact frequencies for water and for oxygen are being used and having these damaging effects on human beings. However, to me, it's not surprising because I have encountered people within some of these intelligence organizations and military, and some of them are former. Like just the other day, I was having a conversation on the phone with a former Department of Defense engineer, and we were talking about anti-gravity technology, and we had another person on the phone who was having a hard time believing it. This guy's like, "Oh no. You believe it? They've got it. They've had it since the 50s at least."
Yeah, that's what Stephen Greer said that too.
Exactly. So most people, their daily lives are so far removed from a lot of the stuff that's going on. They have a hard time believing it because it's beyond science fiction, right. And so they can't conceive that there are people that think of ways to reduce population and to kill off people. But there are entire organizations within the United Nations that look at that. They look at what are we going to do about overpopulation and that kind of stuff. And, right. I know you're too young to remember this, Richard, but back in the 60s when I was in school,
yeah, I have
they talked
that
about
that, though.
But you remember in elementary school, they talked about overpopulation. They were schooling us about what are we going to do about overpopulation. And then suddenly in the 70s,
I read the population bomb when it came out.
Yeah, and then now, in the 70s somewhere it all stopped. Nobody was talking about it anymore. It's because, the debate went away because these organizations, some governmental, some non-governmental, just started doing population reduction.
Right.
And you can see, I used to present some of these documents from the United Nations in my workshops, and then you can go on YouTube and see people like, Bill Gates talking about overpopulation. What are we going to do about it? Here's the equation, and we can't change all these things. And they spin this lie that we can't change pollution, or we can't change this, that, the other. We can't change energy production. Therefore, we got to get rid of people.
Yeah, that's the easiest, most efficient route.
Just inhale to fly. Excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
It was tasty. But the truth is, I've worked with technologies that can completely change the pollution paradigm and the energy production paradigm on this planet. If we were using implosive force technology like Brown's gas or scalar technologies or other ones, we can have not only non-toxic energy production on this planet, in vast amounts, but it could also clean up the pollution on the planet, including the radioactivity. These are the lies that continue to get regurgitated over and over again to people, and that people buy into, is that, oh, we don't have any alternatives in this equation. It's like the only thing we can do is reduce population or stop having babies, control. It's all nonsense. We can have far more people on this planet if we had sustainable technology, sustainable energy production, sustainable farming and agriculture. I grow food, as you know, I grow food with monoatomic elements and things where I'm getting, 4-foot tall celery stalks and kale leaves the size of my arm, and this kind of stuff. And it's not some chemical abomination. It's nutrient-dense food that's just doing more of what nature does. So people have to understand that we have solutions. We always have had solutions. We always will have solutions, because the one big trump card that we've had and always will have is that consciousness creates reality. And so you can be guaranteed the energy of consciousness, which is a form of scalar energy that creates these problems. It has polarity. And so when a polarity is creating these problems, there's always simultaneously a polarity creating the solutions. And I've met so many brilliant people that have solutions to these problems. I know they exist. I've seen them work, and I've used many of them myself. And so we've got to get out of this slave mentality and this slave mode and start questioning our reality and start going within and connecting to source and getting quiet and unplugging from TV and media and Netflix and all that crap. And find these solutions. They're out there. But if you don't know to ask the question, then you'll never find it.
Well,
and this is why,
like you're saying, that scalar technology kind of surpasses the regular frequencies and just goes right through it. People think that all the good solutions are going to come from thinking about it and figuring it out. And you're talking about getting quiet when you're not doing that. And it's kind of an analogy to the scalar waves, because when you get quiet, you get in touch with where the solutions actually come from, right?
Exactly. You're connecting up to God, if you want to think of it that way. You know, I for anybody that kind of wants to see some of the mechanics of this, I've got a video on YouTube. If you go on YouTube and search on Ken Rohla, Physics of Consciousness, you'll see this video. And there's actually a lot of hard science that's being done on how consciousness and physicality works. And, it's been discovered there's this scalar wave energy that comes out of the centers of galaxies, and it's superluminal light. It's light that's traveling millions of times faster than what we've been told is the speed of light. And it's going so fast that it appears invisible to us, or black, and so scientists, conventional scientists call it dark energy or dark matter, but it's just superluminal light zipping out of these centers of galaxies, and then it's relayed throughout the cosmos in this web, through the suns and the planets. Nassim Haramein and others have discovered that planets and suns have these black holes or singularities at their center that act like portals for this energy, because it's not just physical, conventional energy like electromagnetic energy, it's multidimensional energy. So it's traveling through multiple frequencies or dimensions of time and space. But it's relayed through this web of planets and suns through the cosmos. And it comes down to us from our sun, and it comes up from the center of the earth. And we can capture it and utilize it and do things with it. We can create circuits and things that can amplify it and do things with it. And this is how nature utilizes this energy in a lot of ways. It's non-destructive normally. And it's also normally in nature implosive force. So just by doing some fundamental things like switching to implosive force energy production and using implosive force technologies, explosive force technologies like nuclear power and burning hydrocarbons like gasoline and stuff like that, they always has toxic side effects, because fundamentally it's an explosive force technology, and it just comes part and parcel with toxic side effects. Implosive force doesn't. So if we just changed fundamentals, we could have a completely sustainable society. We could have far more people on this planet, and healthy and happy, and expand out into the cosmos as well, colonize other places much more easily. And in fact, that's what's going on. There are secret space program people now that are coming out, and high-level military people, including Paul Hellyer, the highest military officer in Canada back in the 60s and 70s, who was the head of he was the Minister of Defense of Canada, stating that we've got these technologies and we've also had all this extraterrestrial contact and stuff.
Yeah.
And so the militaries know about this stuff and they're using it, but they're not sharing it with the rest of us, and that's got to change.
So if you consider that those different layers of suppression of information, like what you've been talking about, as one of the problems that needs a solution, and pair it back with what you said about when there's a problem created by consciousness, there's always a potential solution created. We can see that applying in all the technical problems. What about the underlying problem of the suppression? How would you approach it from the same point of view, with the opposite solution already being there?
Well, to me, the biggest problem that we have on this planet is not technological or even so much spiritual. Spiritual is kind of an outcropping of this. It's the mind controlling of the population on this planet. Mm-hmm. And, it's funny, people do not want to believe that they're mind controlled, but in fact, mind control has been systematized and it's used technologically and through media in various ways to create a reality for people rather than have them consciously create their own realities. And the reality that's being created for people is one, of course, where the powers that be profit off of people and keep them controlled and manipulated, mainly so that they can be, controlled and harvested, basically, through the financial system as one method, for example, because we all, if you've got a job or you're working for anybody, if you have a company, you're trading dollars for hours. You're trading some kind of real labor and energy, your real labor and energy, for some kind of currency that is put into this monetary system, and it's filtered up through the interest system and through the banking systems into the hands of a very small group of people. So in this way, our real physical energy is being harvested through a monetary system. Do extraterrestrials have monetary systems? According to some of these secret space program whistleblowers, no, they don't. In my experience encountering extraterrestrials, no, they don't. Monetary systems are always used to control a population. Yeah. But mind control, people have got to wake up to the use of mind control on this planet and start working on breaking their mind control through the techniques that I've been teaching for many years, which is doing emotional healing work, reprogramming the unconscious mind. There are things like Vipassana meditation. Any kind of meditation will do it, but I really like Vipassana meditation because it's a technique that you can use that really cuts right through and breaks the programming. Things like landmark education for digging inside and releasing your issues, and the trauma-based mind control, the programming that we have from this. See, the powers that be have known about this for a long time, and as long as people have been around, there have been the attempts by the people in charge to manipulate public consciousness. But it's gotten really heinous since World War II because during World War II and the Nazi regime, Hitler used a lot of technologies and techniques and got very sophisticated with mind control in Nazi Germany. And when the war was over and the United States and Great Britain and Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, stepped in to grab the spoils of war, they were, trying to get as much as they could. There was basically a battle going on to try and get as much technology and materials and stuff from the Nazi regime into each country. So the United States and Soviet Union primarily got a lot of rocket scientists and technology scientists. They also got a lot of mind scientists. And when they discovered all this heinous mind control work that the Nazi scientists were doing, the United States military, in their great wisdom, rather than stopping it, decided to expand it, with the logic being that, well, if we don't do it, somebody else will. So we better create it and use it rather than having somebody use it against us. And so now it's filtered into even mainstream, corporate worlds and in business. And so it's being used in various ways, not just by governments, but also by corporations, which really now corporations are a government because we've got a corporatocracy.
Right.
But, there are ways to break this. And so people first have to admit and acknowledge that, number one, they are mind controlled. And it doesn't matter if you exactly know how, but just the possibility that you're mind controlled. And then utilize things like meditation, emotional healing work, cannabis, and you don't necessarily have to smoke pot. You can take hemp paste, for example, or hemp oils, the CBD oils that are high in CBD, but they don't have the THC and they won't get you high. But, it's been scientifically shown that consumption of marijuana will break mind control programming. People that are taking cannabis regularly cannot be mind controlled, and it's because it opens up the pineal gland and people can see through the lies. And that's another important point, developing the pineal gland, eating foods that are high in living foods, high in minerals, and specifically high in monoatomic elements. There are certain foods, like, for example, aloe, that are high in gold and rhodium and iridium that'll plug into the pineal gland, open up the pineal gland, and then you become much more psychic and aware and intuitive, and you're not so easily misled. And I see a lot of people on Earth now who don't know what to believe because they don't have any discernment, because there's so much disinformation and mind control going on through the internet and social media and everywhere else. So they just shut down and go, everything's a conspiracy theory, or there's nothing we can do, or all hope is lost.
I think that's one of the main messages in mind control, is that you're helpless.
Exactly.
Just relax and rely on the experts. And it's not just, it's a multi-pronged attack, which is because I think the rulers agree with you that mind control is really important. It's a great way to get rid of dissent completely and not have those irritating people getting in the way of the programs.
Right.
And so it's misinformation, which is very subtle and sophisticated. Even kids' cartoons, they do freeze frames, and they find satanic images inside the pupils of the little animals that are the heroes in the cartoons and stuff. It's really pretty amazing. But also its frequency. And there was a whistleblower in Portland, Seattle, I think, recently, Brian something. He was completely made to disappear. All of his videos were taken down. His audios were erased and everything. But he worked at what was euphemistically termed a private security company. You might have heard of him. I don't remember his last name. Maybe it starts with a K or something. And he just had to quit because of what they were really doing. He couldn't feel okay with that. And he got out, and before they got rid of him, he explained that they were using frequencies which, as I said, were perfected for individual use in World War II. But now they've gone a lot further, and their whole experiment was, how do we control the thoughts, but especially the emotions, of millions of people at one time? Exactly. With some kind of transmission. And he said they were actually doing that, and it made me wonder, the people that are running around in the cities and the universities now just screaming and violently protesting, but they're not really sure against what. They know they really are against it, but they're not sure what it is, or they memorize some terms and stuff, and you try to talk to them and they'll just start screaming. I wonder if that's partly because of these experiments.
It could be. There's definitely, there are energy technologies that are being used to suppress consciousness and mind control people on Earth. I met a guy who had developed some kind of free energy technology and was trying to get it developed with the U.S. government. He actually wanted to, have the military use it in some form or fashion. And so he got deeply connected with some people in the military. And he said that they had technologies, not only like these tower-based technologies for transmitting frequencies that will make people more complacent or, have less energy, but he said they were even manipulating the ley lines on Earth, that, there's this energy coming from the center of the Earth. Scalar waves actually is what it is, coming from the center of the Earth. And Nassim Haramein, for folks that want to learn more about this, Nassim Haramein has a video called The Black Hole, WHOLE, about this. But this energy coming from the center of the Earth is structured geometrically. And so it basically creates these little vortices of scalar waves that come out to the surface of the Earth. And they come out at certain points around the Earth in a geometric pattern. And gravitation and the rotation of the Earth wound up pulling these scalar waves, these vortices, down across the surface of the Earth. And so they're spiraling and running across the surface of the Earth, and they create this kind of grid of energy. And so apparently, according to this guy, the powers that be are putting devices around where these points come out, the stronger ones, to change the frequency so that it's not harmonious to living organisms.
That's interesting. Yeah, because the positive version of that is when they located all the pyramids and things on points of convergence of those same lines, but that was positive.
Right.
So they want to do just a little bit different version, so it hurts everything.
Exactly. So there is a battle for consciousness going on this planet, and to me that's the biggest issue, because when you're having your reality crafted for you by someone else that wants to basically, manipulate you and harvest you and control you, profit off of you, then you're not going to be living in a very happy reality. And so we got to break the mind control programming. So just acknowledging that it exists, number one, people need to go out, excuse me, and study. Like Kathy O'Brien, she was a trauma-based mind control subject, the U.S. government mind control subject. She wrote a book called Transformation of America, and that's TRANCE, Formation of America. And then also Bryce Taylor, BRICE Taylor. She wrote a book called Thanks for the Memories, The Truth Has Set Me Free. Her real name is Susan Ford. She was also a high-level trauma-based mind control subject in the U.S. government. So these people, and there's tons of information. There's actually mainstream psychologists and people writing and talking about trauma-based mind control. So it needs to be acknowledged.
The idea being that trauma makes you vulnerable to things. Once you get really undermined by the trauma, then your natural defenses kind of have holes in them after that, right? You're more programmable.
Exactly. When you are exposed to a trauma, it's been discovered that what happens is it makes right and left brain hemisphere function separate. And excuse me, get my throat clear.
That's interesting.
And that will make you more open to suggestion and programming.
Okay.
So the powers that be know this. So sometimes, excuse me, they will engineer a trauma event, or they'll just use something traumatic that happens, in the public eye, and they will push it in the news and push it and promote it heavily in the news to create trauma and drama, and then also do things like social engineering on social media to keep that trauma and drama promoted, manipulate people so that they're fighting over race or sex or age or income levels or, foreign versus domestic or whatever, all these different ways that they can divide and conquer and keep everybody fighting and arguing. And then that opens up the programming, and then they step in with the programming through all the various ways of media, social media.
And this is kind of interlaced with the idea that like attracts like, right? So if you become fear-based, which is one of the lowest frequencies that you can operate on, then you're going to be susceptible to all kinds of things that if you felt integrated in yourself would never affect you.
Right, exactly. And the thing of it is, it's kind of like, once you open up that can of worms and you start breaking your programming, and not just mind control programming from governments or whatever, but the programming that we all have from our youth, from our very early age, we all, even if there was no sinister sources of mind control out there, we all get programmed with beliefs from our very early youth, usually from 7 years and younger, where we encounter things, sometimes maybe traumatic things, maybe little things, big things, could be anything from a car wreck to a guy at the grocery store being rude to you, or just something that somebody said. You may latch onto it as a small child and interpret that as this is the way the world is, when it's not really the way the world is. It's just your interpretation of it. And so then we'll create stories around these things that we encounter and believe from an early age, and then we'll live our lives as if that's true. And it's not true. Landmark education does a really good job at identifying, helping people to identify and stop those programs that don't serve people. And
so what do you think makes people susceptible to the belief that, you were saying all these bases on which people can be divided, right? So-called race and age and social class and gender and all this stuff. What do you think makes people susceptible to the belief that not only do you feel separated from the people in the other group. For their own good, you have to kill them all, which has been a belief that's been around for many thousands of years in different forms. And it's happening now.
Well, that's interesting because, I don't talk about this a whole lot generally in public, but on your show, I think we probably can get away with it. But, get ready to go deep down the rabbit hole here.
Yeah, that's all right. It's okay.
But there's actually been corroboration with this, interestingly enough, recently. But, first of all, people are being mind controlled to be fearful of each other just by human beings, programming us to be afraid of each other and to fight each other and that kind of stuff. And so that, that propagates war and conflict.
Right.
But then also, and, this has been going on just between people for thousands of years. But also, I've encountered reptilian extraterrestrials who told me that human beings have been mind controlled, since human beings have been around, basically here on Earth, to make us fearful of each other so that we would become warlike. And that eventually we would develop technologies, war technology. And by the way, they said that developing war technologies is the best way to accelerate technological development on a planet. It's like technology gets developed much more quickly if you believe that there's a threat that you need to protect yourself from. And so a lot of times, well, anyway, what these reptilians told me was that reptilians would come to Stone Age civilizations and they would start mind controlling them from a very early age to make them very fearful, knowing that eventually they would become warlike and they would eventually develop the war technologies that we have now on our planet. And then these reptilians would come back in and trade little dribbles of higher technology to whatever factions were in power in exchange for using the manufacturing base of that planet to manufacture weapons and spacecraft and things that they could then go and use to conquer more worlds out in space.
Yeah, so it just shows that so-called advanced beings can be just as confused as regular people.
Exactly. And, there's a whole huge story around all this. I know it sounds absurd to people that, may have not had any exposure to this, but basically what they showed me was that the reason that these reptilians act this way is, and they do have this shunted view of reality, it's even though they're much more advanced technologically than us, is because of their birthing process and their culture. They evolved, it's a long story, but basically they evolved through a birthing process where they do not raise and nurture their children and their young the way we do. Just like reptiles here on Earth, like snakes and lizards and alligators and stuff, reptilian couples will have fertilized eggs that they will take to a communal nursery, like a government-run communal nursery, and they will be hatched and raised by the state, and then the state will only give a limited amount of food and resources to the babies to enable them to grow. And so they actually have to fight over the food and resources. And so most of them wind up dying, just like, like a reptilian nest of eggs here on Earth. You have little sea turtles or little baby alligators hatch out of the nest. Most of them die very soon after their birth because they're eaten by predators and such. And so however that evolved within this reptilian culture, their culture does their birthing process this way, and they also clone a lot of their people. And so they never are nurtured and raised by their parents, and therefore they never develop this connection, this emotional connection to other people and beings, and also they have to fight to survive, and so they develop what we would consider a psychosis.
That sounds like Earth.
Yeah, well, it really is in a lot of ways. But this reptilian influence, this reptilian extraterrestrial influence on Earth, has been propagated through mind control on this planet for thousands of years, and that's why you see this very reptilian culture here on Earth of competition and
it's really getting more like that. I mean, normal business now is like what you're saying.
Right. And I think it's because this influence has become more prevalent, particularly since we've become more technologically advanced. We've had, covertly, our militaries have had more interaction with extraterrestrials, which many of them now are coming out and saying, including William Tompkins, who was one of the architects of the U.S. space program. And he also reiterated that he was saying the same thing, that these reptilians go and mind control Stone Age populations and have this whole modus operandi. But that's why you see this crazy influence on Earth, and yet, because human beings have emotions, those that have not been traumatized to the point where they become sociopaths, they still have the compassion. And so there's this battle going on, between the sociopaths and the reptilian influence on Earth and the human influence. And I think this is why a lot of people can resonate with politicians and leaders who are actually human, because a lot of our leaders on this planet are not human, or they're heavily influenced by these extraterrestrials, and they're sociopaths. And so when you get a human being who's in power, even if they're not an ideal leader, just the fact that they're human and they have some emotion and compassion, they're going to act differently. And so people will resonate with that over somebody who's not that way.
So would you agree with the idea that humans have so much, pretty much unlimited potential healing power within themselves because of their connection all the way back to where they came from, that a relatively small critical mass of more awake humans could reverse the whole mess that you're talking about?
Absolutely. And, as above, so below, there's not just one type of ET that's been interacting with this planet. There's been many different types. I don't know how many different types, but some people say thousands. But in my experience, at least, a dozen that I've encountered in some form or fashion. And so most extraterrestrials are, more spiritually as well as technologically advanced, and they are not malevolent. And so they are, they have been fighting with these reptilians as well, and having various battles out in the cosmos. And so my understanding, what I'm being told, is that the reptilians are losing that battle. And so that's why you see a lot of the madness on this planet publicly, is the desperation of these people and extraterrestrials that are losing their grip and trying to hang on to it desperately.
Right. So, again, if people want to make the outside world better, their work is internal.
Right.
They've got to do the work in themselves. And it sounds counterintuitive because, wasting your time on self-improvement stuff when you should be out fighting these things in the world. And yet, because of the deeper nature of individual humans who are like a holographic representation of the whole, that whatever they really do in themselves reflects on the outside.
Right. Paradigm shifts never occur by fighting the old paradigm. Paradigm shifts occur by creating a new paradigm that's so much better. The old one just dies on the vine because nobody wants it. Yeah. And that's what I've been saying, for many years to people, is that, it's not to fight the existing paradigm. It's to opt out of it and opt into a paradigm that's so much better that other people will want it for themselves. For example, just with health. If you are happy and healthy and it's obvious to people, they're going to know what you're doing and they're going to ask you. And in that way, you can share what you're doing, that's working with others, and they can adopt it. And that's how it spreads. It's like technologically the socialization of services online with these technologies like Uber and Airbnb and Turo, which is a service where you can actually rent your car out as a rental car and stuff like that. This so-called millennial generation, the younger generation, does not have the wealth that the previous generations had, and so they're coming up with these really brilliant, novel ways of sharing resources, which is exactly what we need to do. And it's become very trendy in the mainstream media to bash so-called millennials, which is more divide and conquer. The millennials are going to be the ones saving this planet and saving us as a civilization. And, it's happening sheerly out of necessity because these old paradigms are not sustainable. And so even though the old paradigm is fighting it tooth and nail, they're not going to stop it.
So I noticed the evolution of and development of two different forms of intelligence. One is kind of really brilliant but very foolish, developing amazing ways of committing suicide as a planet. And a lot of those people are just really proud of their accomplishments, and they don't even see what's right in front of them, which is this is not really a very smart idea. And there's another kind of intelligence that's connected to an awareness that we're all part of the same being, right? So if you hurt somebody else, it's not a philosophical transgression. It actually does physically come back to you multiplied.
Right.
So
exactly. And these, a lot of these people and scientists, like, for example, I won't name names, but there's one Harvard University professor who is like the poster child for geoengineering. He's running around promoting that idea. And of course, he's got a company doing it, making millions of dollars from it.
Yeah.
And stands to make probably billions of dollars from it. And, in one breath, he'll say that, oh, this is madness and we don't want to have to do this, but there's no other alternative, so we have to do this, which is a lie. And
right.
I suspect he knows it's a lie. But even if he doesn't, it's because these people are so disconnected from themselves and from nature. And all you got to do is look at this guy's anatomy, and you can see he's disconnected from himself and nature. He's not a healthy guy,
right.
Not mentally or physically. That you can see this is why this influence of splitting the right and left brain hemisphere functions. It leaves a lot of people very left-brained or very right-brained. So the very left-brained people, they have no connection to nature or to themselves or to other people. And, a lot of times they're just in it for themselves. So they figure, what the hell, the world's going to go up in a ball of flames anyway. Let me just milk it for what I can get while I'm alive, and make a bunch of money. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where there's people that are so right-brained that they don't have no discernment. They can't tell shit from shinola. And they can't balance logical thinking with intuition. And so this is why we've got to break the mind control programming, reintegrate the right and left brain hemisphere function through healing work, through reprogramming the unconscious mind using these techniques that I mentioned, like Vipassana, like affirmations. There are certain technologies. There's one called New Reality, for example, for people who are interested, newreality.com, which uses visuals and audio, like binaural beats, to reprogram the mind. HoloSync and HemiSync, which are binaural beats programs that also will reintegrate right and left brain hemisphere function. Landmark education, all these different kinds of things, going within, working on yourself, meditation, spiritual work, all of that will reintegrate the hemisphere functions, and then you're not easily deceived.
Right. What other kinds of, since we talked about the scalar-based technologies on the 2 scales, the rest shield, which I really highly recommend because I've been sleeping near one for about 3 years, and I notice a really big benefit from it. People can read about that on your site, but also the home shield, which is good enough to have the AT&T seal of approval, apparently, because they came around to shut it down at my...
And as you know, Richard, I developed the home shield for another use. And if you use it as directed, you will get that benefit without even knowing about it. It's not just for EMF and sleep. It's actually primarily designed for something else entirely. Yeah. If people want to know more about that, they can contact us and we can send them information about, other things it can do.
Yeah, I really recommend that too. I've done some experimenting with that enough for it to look like it is really happening. And it's got government seal of approval on many levels, apparently. But there's a lot of other stuff on your site, too, relating to growing plants and providing food and nutrition, other stuff like that. And they can read your site and watch your videos and anything else like that, I guess. What do you want to leave them with as a bottom line? And then I don't want you to go away after the break. I've got a couple of other things I need to let you know about, but just as a bottom line from this discussion.
Well, first of all, with 5G, the bottom line is that people need to understand that there is protection. You want to not buy into the Internet of Things, first of all. Aside from the privacy and the spying, you're going to be immersed in an ocean of EMF with that, number one. And even if they, put a tower near your home or whatever, because it's low power, because it's millimeter wave, it's going to be lower power. And so that can be dealt with these scalar devices. However, using avoidance, using scalar devices, using shielding like Faraday cages around your bed or whatever, all these different things, you want to use all of them, all of the mitigation you can.
Right.
But understanding that that's not a panacea, that's not a solution. It's kind of like wearing noise-canceling headphones in a room that's really noisy. It's not.
You also might have to go out of your house someday, right?
Right, and in those cases, I've got a powered scalar wave generator I'll be bringing back out on the market that you can carry with you called the Stress Shield. You can use EMF pendants. But yeah, that is a big concern. And, I travel a lot, and, even before 5G, there's massive radiation on airplanes, for example, and in airports. And not just electromagnetic radiation. There's a lot of nuclear radiation up in the atmosphere that will permeate planes as well. Dr. Patrick Flanagan has measured that with some sophisticated equipment he has around the planet. He said it's not safe to fly anymore. Yeah. And so we have stuff to mitigate this, though. We've got supplements and things that can neutralize radioactivity in the body. So we have solutions, but again, it's not a long-term solution. A long-term solution is get rid of these technologies and implement technologies that are healthy and healing to the body and do the same things.
Right, and you can contribute to that the best starting immediately by changing your own inner consciousness, right?
Right, and improving your physical health too. Yeah. The stronger you are physically, the more you can withstand a lot of this stuff.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our 30-minute chapter of this discussion, and hopefully we'll, do some more chapters before long.
Yeah, okie doke.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Okay, you guys, that was Ken Rohla, and I like to get Ken on whenever we get a chance, and one of these issues like 5G comes up because he's got a unique perspective as an inventor, engineer, and natural health teacher as well, and that combination is kind of rare, or almost unique, actually. And what in this particular case, I think the most important thing is that Ken is agreeing and has been demonstrating that technological advances don't have to be things that hurt and kill you. That's really not necessary. And we got kind of used to that because a lot of the advances now, the vast majority seem to be things that harm not just humans, but all life. We were talking about smart meters with Ken, and it was actually demonstrated in Josh Del Sol's original movie, Take Back Your Power, that the radiation from smart meters harms not only humans, whether they feel it or not, and most of them don't. It also harms animals, plants, trees, insects, aphids. Aphids are insects, I know, but the aphids were in a specific part of that movie, and it was showing them vibrating with the radiation going out of the smart meter. These things are really bad, and I think Ken was agreeing with us that it's not by mistake that they come up with the specific frequencies like with the previous generations of microwave technologies. They've been disrupting the natural frequency of water, which happens to be most of your body. When you so-called age and degenerate, which is quite flexible, it's really not necessary, but most people are falling into it. When one of the signs of aging, getting down toward the limit of what you can survive, is the percentage of water that you have in your body. And I forget the exact number, but I think it was saying that after being really high when you're a baby and then gradually falling in the normal lifestyle of how we live now, and then when it gets into the 60s or so, you're approaching death. And so they chose a frequency that would undermine the vibration of water. That was pretty interesting for the cell development. And now at the much higher level, the higher frequency, which is going to be used for 5G, it happens to be the frequency that disrupts the natural energy of oxygen, which you kind of need for like staying alive in your body, so that these things aren't just coincidences. Essentially nothing is just a chance coincidence. It's just that you may or may not see the causes and the reasons behind it. So Ken was saying, as you know, that everybody in communities needs to let the little rulers in the city council or the county commissioners or whatever is telling you what to do, that like I went to a city council meeting where I live in Arizona, and they didn't care. They just said, well, the federal and the state governments have decided that we're not allowed to protest if it destroys our health or the environment, but any other comments are fine. And the city council needs to be told, No, that's actually not fine. And if the federal or state government makes a rule that you have to commit suicide, which this actually might be, then in that case, that kind of a law is null and void, because you can't make a law that everybody has to be killed and it's a valid law. It's not. And Ken was saying that, but plus find out the ways to protect yourself and go to freshandalive.com, which is a really good website, worth studying, I think, and that he's got some protective devices that you can look at. The few that I've tried from his site actually are good. So I think he's a really honest inventor, engineer, health person. And speaking of health, he is mentioning that whatever you do, if you wear a pendant or, get a rest shield from his site or whatever, the main thing you have to do is take care of your health, not on the level that the medical industry tells you, but really get your health and energy back, because you have natural resistance. And Clifford Carnicom talked about this when he was on the show, about talking about the chemtrail residues that are highly unnatural, not found in nature. And even with that, if you raise the natural vitality and resistance of your body, even cross-domain bacteria and strange things that are leading to Morgellons and stuff, those can actually be resisted. You have immunity that is incredible. And the real health the real health information that leads to developing that immunity is not allowed to be told. So our intent is to tell it and give it to everybody. And that's what we can't say too much on the public forum, but in Planetary Healing Club, we can go into it in as much detail as you may want. It's all interactive. I go there every week in person, and so does Doug. And we talk about this stuff without restriction, really, because it's not a public forum. And if you go to lostartsradio.com/club, you can get in if you want to. No commitment to anything. Try it out, see if you like it. But that's where we talk with no hesitation and no keyword concerns for the AI or anything like that. But whether you do it with us in a supportive, interactive environment there to find out what your real potential is for health and self-awareness, do it some other way if you want, by yourself or with friends or whatever is comfortable for you. But Ken's main message, and I would certainly echo it, is get your health back. Don't fall into the drug mentality, either recreational or over-the-counter or medical, if you can help it. And if you can get a brilliant doctor to get you off the drugs you're on, if they'll help you do that, it's really a good idea, because they're all poison. And they may cover up symptoms temporarily, but you need your natural health back. It's way stronger. And so he was saying, do that. Change your consciousness. Become aware of the programs that are running in your mind that are negative, what they call, about placebos, right? And those can, just by the power of your mind, help you tremendously. And the other side of that is called nocebo, where you believe junk that's told to you by the medical industry. Oh, you're only going to live 3 months or whatever it is they tell you. You'll never walk again. You won't ever be able to, have normal cognitive function. They love to tell you stuff like this, most of them. And those are called nocebo, which means if you believe a self-limiting statement by your own mind or from other people that you agree with, your mind is very powerful and it'll make it come true, or try to. So you want to become aware of those programs running in the back of your mind and start communicating with your mind and entice it to do something a little more positive. And like we were talking about with Ken today, you are actually more powerful than any cell tower they can invent. But that it doesn't do you any good to just know that. You have to actually develop it, and there are ways to do that. So if you're ever interested, that's what we talk about in the club meetings. And otherwise, learn as much as you can, apply it. The real way for you to help heal the rest of the outside world and the people that would just argue with you, and some of whom you can't even talk to. Don't waste your time debating. Work on yourself, and who you become is going to change the other people. It sounds impossible, but it isn't. So I encourage you to do that. Don't ever be discouraged or think about the stuff you can't do. find out what you can do. It's quite amazing. And thanks for being with us today. It was great to have this chance to talk with Ken. Remember the Sunday show and keep up with all the shows at lostartsradio.com. If we get kicked off, if or when we get kicked off major platforms for video, find us at Real Video, which is becoming Brighteon.com. That's Brighteon, like bright new period of time, .com, Brighteon.com. And they're not going to be censoring anything other than, radical calls to communist violence or stuff like that. They're not going to have that on there. But any good stuff that's getting thrown off all the major platforms now, they're not going to censor it. And if you've got a website or a YouTube channel or something like that, take a look at Brighteon.com. It's a good place for you to be in the future and starting now. Anyway, nice to be with you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for being here.
Introducing Lost Arts Radio Live, our new Saturday late afternoon, early evening 1-hour live stream show. This new show precedes our Planetary Healing Club, which starts at 9 p.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. Pacific. The Planetary Healing Club, which is not free and open to the public, but you can join for a minimum donation of just $10 a month. Our new live stream show, which is free, starts Saturdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern and 4:30 Pacific. It can be accessed by going to lostartsradio.com/live. You can tune into our live stream from our Facebook page at facebook.com/lostartsradio, from our YouTube channel at youtube.com/lostartsradio, as well as both Periscope and Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. You can ask questions during the show by using the chat function on YouTube or make a comment on Facebook during the live stream. Once again, that's Lost Arts Radio Live, Saturdays at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. As of January 2018, the Saturday live call-in show is now an interactive video platform called the Planetary Healing Club. The cost is just a $10 minimum monthly donation, automatically billed through your PayPal account. Sign up at lostartsradio.com/club. The Planetary Healing Club is every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. You get your link to participate in the show upon signing up as a member. Those shows are also archived as well for club members. Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All Sunday shows with guests have archives freely available on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can also find them at blogtalkradio.com/lostartsradio, as well as our YouTube channel, youtube.com/C/lostartsradio. Mixcloud at mixcloud.com/lostartsradio. And finally, look us up under the podcast directory on iTunes. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/lostartsradio or on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Be sure to join the free Lost Arts Radio Facebook group as well. Just search for Lost Arts Radio Group within Facebook. You can also join our forum on our website if you want to interact with other listeners. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab or right from the button on our Facebook page. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.
Fiery sunsets. Stars like glitter fill the sky. Beautiful, so wonderful. It's a beauty only we can see. It all means nothing without you and me. Only we have this gift inside, to be the